Guys, in this module, I'm going to talk about the calorie deficit. Now, in order to improve your body composition and to burn fat and to look better, to lose weight, we need to get into what we call the calorie deficit. I'm sure you've heard of it, I'm sure you've read about it, it's all over social media at the moment. Now, what is a calorie deficit? So basically, a calorie deficit, very simply, is when you consume less calories than you require on a day-to-day basis, and therefore you are tapping in to your fat storage as for energy. So you are in a calorie deficit. So for example, if you required 2,000 calories on a day-to-day basis to do your normal things, to maintain your weight and so on and so forth, well then if you started consuming 1,600 calories or 1,700 calories, you would therefore be in a deficit and you would therefore be making your body tap into its fat stores for energy. Okay, so that's just very simply what a calorie deficit is. Now, if we look at any diet out there, whether it's Weight Watchers, whether it's the keto diet, whatever diet is out there, they all work off the principle of a calorie deficit. The only difference between them is they achieve the calorie deficit in different ways. Okay, so for example, some diets will remove a complete food group or will reduce a food group, such as carbs, for example. And by taking carbs out of a diet, you are therefore taking a number of units of energy out of the diet and you are putting yourself into a calorie deficit. At the end of the day, it doesn't make a difference what way you achieve the calorie deficit. The most important thing is that it is sustainable and it is something you can adhere to long term. That is one of my key philosophies when it comes to dieting. And this is where a lot of people make a mistake. There's no magic diet out there. All these diets will work by putting you into calorie deficit. But if you can't adhere to them for the rest of your life or for the next year or next 6 months, you're not going to achieve fat loss long term, or you're not going to be able to control your day-to-day eating. So it's important to understand what a calorie deficit is, and it's important to understand that fat loss just comes from getting into a calorie deficit. Whether your diet is full of chocolate, you could literally eat chocolate all day and just make sure that you don't go into your maintenance or surplus levels, and you would still lose weight. Okay, so that's just something to be very, very clear on. So adherence and sustainability is super important. Now there are a couple of other things I want to talk about. A BMR and TDEE. These are two terms that you may have come across, may not have come across, but they're super important to know. So your TDE is your total daily expenditure, okay? And your BMR is your basal metabolic rate. That's what those two terms stand for. I'm going to talk about them now. So your BMR, your basal metabolic rate, is the amount of calories that you require on a day-to-day basis just to survive. So in other words, if you were to lie in bed all day and do nothing, you would still need a number of calories to survive. That is your BMR rate. And this is calculated from your height, from your age, and from your weight. Okay, so the bigger the person, the more calories are needed. Okay, this is why men often require more calories to maintain than females, because we're normally bigger. Okay, so the bigger the person, the more calories required. So this BMR number is going to be very different for every single person. Now the second term, which is super important to know, is your TDEE, your total daily energy expenditure. This is basically the amount of calories that you require to survive on a day-to-day basis with all your movements included. So for example, somebody who works as a teacher and sits down all day is going to require less calories than somebody who is a teacher and is up on their feet and moving around all day. Just like an office worker in comparison to a builder. A builder is going to require more energy because they're on their feet, they're lifting all day for 7 or 8 hours, whereas an office worker is just sitting down and not expending much energy. So your TDEE is the total daily energy expenditure you require on a day-to-day basis. And this number is the important number because that is basically your maintenance level. If you eat your TDEE solid for weeks and weeks and weeks, everything will stay the same. To get into your calorie deficit, you basically need to eat slightly less than your TDEE. okay? Slightly less than your maintenance, because therefore you're getting yourself into a deficit. That extra energy you require is going to have to come from your stored energy or your stored body fat. Okay, now how much of a deficit you go into is super important as well, because this is where I have a bad issue with fad diets, because they put people into a massive deficit. And of course, you are going to lose body fat and you are going to lose weight in a short period of time. But you are not going to be able to adhere to it because it is too restrictive. A good rule of thumb is to go about 10 to 15% of a deficit of your TDEE. So for example, let's break this down into numbers, because numbers are a lot easier to work with. If your TDEE was 2,000 calories per day and you wanted to go into a deficit, a good deficit, something that would be something that you'll be able to adhere to and that's sustainable, it's not overly restrictive, but it's still a deficit, will be around 10 to 15%. We'll say 15%. 15% of 2,000 calories is 300 calories. So if you were to consume 1,700 calories per day, you would be in a deficit of 300 calories every single day. If you were to do that over the course of a week, that would be 2,100 calories. Over the course of 2 weeks, you're 4,200 calories of a deficit. And if you remember from my last video, 3,500 calories equals 1 pound of body fat. You're probably sitting there thinking 1 pound of body fat is not a lot. Now, 1 pound of body fat is not the same as 1 pound of body weight that you see on the scale. It's actual body fat. And if you were to lose 5 pounds of body fat over the course of, say, 10 weeks, right, your body composition is going to change dramatically. And this is where people kind of go off, they go wrong. They don't have the patience. Patience and consistency is super, super important. They want to see results now. Now, over the next 60 days, our deficit is going to be slightly higher than 15%. In most cases, slightly higher, just so that we're able to adhere to our diet. Our energy expenditure is going to be higher than normal because of the training plan. So we're going to see those results if we are consistent with our training, consistent with our nutrition over the next 60 days. But I also want you to know that it's super important that you listen to your body, because the more of a deficit you're in, the less amount of energy you're going to have, your mood is going to be off, and you're going to be tired. So if your training is suffering, if your sleep is suffering, if your energy is suffering, it's super important that you tell me in the Facebook group, private message, whatever it is, to say, right, training's been poor this week, sleep has been poor this week, I think I'm in too much of a deficit. Then what we'll do is we'll slightly raise your calories and we'll monitor it, okay? So there's no perfect formula, there's no perfect number. We just want to get into our calorie deficit. We want our training to be adding to the deficit as well, and we're going to get super lean over the next 60 days. But guys, I hope that bit of information was useful. You have a bit more knowledge now what a calorie deficit is, you understand what a BMR is, and you understand what your total daily energy expenditure is, okay? So I want you now to click on the next video where we're going to further educate ourselves on nutrition.